This podcast includes explicit content. Listener discretion is advised.
And 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Earthstays podcast. Today we're debunking some of our favorite sex myths with a focus on the cardinal sins, porn and masturbation. Is porn addiction real? Can you orgasm with your G-spot? Is fisting really as good as Lina thinks it is? So ladies, ready for some myth busting?
Mythbusters!
The Earthstays podcast. I'm Bolita Bubble and I'm excited to have some new radio mics today. How does your voices sound, ladies?
Upgraded.
Ooh, do I sound sexy?
I hope that we do actually sound sexy.
Give me your names in a most sexy voice.
Pandora.
Olivia Rose.
I'm Lina, kids.
Okay, so let's get to first base. So ladies, meeting new people to date doesn't seem to be hard in a big city in the 21st century, right? But once you start talking to someone, how do you know if it's worth your time?
I don't know. I'm really tired of Tinder at the moment. I'm not meeting anyone very good on Tinder. I went on a date and then I went on and I wasn't sure if it was good. So I went on a second date and I still wasn't sure if it was good. And then I went on a third date. So I don't know. I think I'm going to give up.
That's so generous of you. Where do you find the time to do that?
Such a waste of time.
But like, what if they're really nervous on the first date? Because I'm very nervous on the first date and maybe they're not the best version of themselves.
Oh, you're so patient.
I hardly ever give second chances. Like there's never a second chance to give a first impression, right? So
Do you have a time limit, like 2 hours, 30 minutes or?
I'd say 10 minutes.
Oh, fuck.
You know what? I'm so impatient. I get bored even in the conversation on Tinder before we've even met in person. Me using dating apps is I just read the first line where they compliment me and then I'm like, I'm good, I'm done. I can do something else now.
Unmatch.
But yeah, that's why dating apps don't really work for me. But the other day I actually met someone in real life.
In real life?
Yeah, does that ever happen to you anymore?
Can't remember.
Right, exactly. Well, I was walking past this guy and he was just this beautiful Adonis type figure because he was just standing in the most perfect sunlight. So I sort of stared at him as I walked past, but I felt like it was more in a kind of aesthetic appreciation way. But then the next minute I turned around and he was walking beside me with his bike, which could be like quite a romantic movie type thing.
Or creepy.
Or creepy.
Negative.
Immediately I was like, oh, it's creepy. But then I was like, maybe I should give it a bit more chance. I don't know. So then he sort of said, which way are you going? And I said, this way. So then it was a kind of, so we have to the end of this road to work out if this is like...
Going somewhere,
basically. Yeah. But as soon as I realized that was the situation, I was immediately put off because it's just awkward. Then what are you talking about? What do? You know, you're trying to work out if you're going to be a good match for dating or something. And then I thought, actually, though, because he was quite immediate and he was like really looking at me. Maybe it was just a sex thing. Like, oh, I noticed you looking at me. Let's go hook up now. Like, I was just assuming we're now going to walk down the road, get to know each other, maybe exchange numbers, maybe go on 3 dates just in case we were just nervous.
That sounds like the perfect date.
Did you think he was more aiming at a cruising situation?
Like a cruising... if I was a gay guy, sure, maybe. But, like, I don't think that's so available.
No, it's not.
But actually, I think about it. If he was just like, you know, should we just go behind that bush? I would have been kind of into it. It would have been more exciting. I was put off by the labor of having to work out if this person is interesting.
Small talk kills the mood.
Small talk kills it. But I once met this guy actually who was really not a small talk person at all. I was at this event surrounded by friends and everything, and he was just standing opposite me saying the most inappropriate things, scanning me up and down and being like, you've got amazing hips. I bet I know exactly how you're going to fuck with those hips.
Oh, I love a good dirty talker. Oh.
Yeah, it was so hot. And, you know, those lips. I've had, do you like biting? I bet you like biting. And it was just...
Is he listening to that Dirty Talk podcast by Rain de Gay?
I don't know. Maybe. What podcast?
That Dirty Talk podcast by Rain de Grey. You can search him on Twitter or something.
Oh, really?
Check it out.
What's about? What's your favorite dirty stuff?
I'm not delving that until later. We've only just met, Lina.
Wait, so what event was this you were at, Olivia?
It was an intellectual chess boxing match.
I like how you add intellectual. Like, that's going to divert from that you went to a chess boxing match. Yeah. Why do you go all these weird places? And you flirt with, was it interesting people?
Well, as I said, super interesting. I feel if I just go to bars to meet people or I go on Tinder, it's just the same kinds of people. But if you go to a really random event, like chess boxing, for example, I don't know. Because I think often we're attracted to people that are not.
Do I need to bring a mouth guard?
Wait, I don't even understand the concept of chess boxing. What is that about?
There's so many questions now.
So like a round starts and it's like ding, ding, ding. And then they both walk onto the stage and sit down and then play a few moves. And then it's the end of the round and then they get up. And
are people like screaming, making
they
bets,
walk on in
or
their
like
robes and it's all like do, 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 do. And then
in this corner.
in the corner, yeah. But then they just sit down and it all goes quiet and then they move the chest.
That sounds
That's hilarious.
geeky.
Wait, so did you fuck him in the bathroom? Wait,
Did
so
I fuck him in the bathroom? No, I really wanted to, but there was actually this other guy there.
Oh my God.
He was a friend of friends, and he was, I don't know, he was a director, and he was talking to me about taking photos, and there was this whole, maybe there's a potential for something to happen here. I know he'd like stayed longer than his friends had stayed to talk to me more, so I sort of felt the pressure to not go off and fuck this guy in the bathroom.
And listen to him talk about him directing stuff.
I know. I know.
You had both. Why didn't you go for both? Like,
Lina.
sorry, I have some mild case of diarrhea, and then you just like go fucking in the bathroom, and then.
Oh my God, I thought you meant as in bring them two together.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe I wasn't brave enough. I didn't have the guts to do it. And
You went
I
to a
with this
chess
other guy.
boxing match. You had the guts.
I know.
You know what? Like these things require practice. Like
Yeah.
having all like this, being like ready to just like jump and stuff, and so it requires like some practice, I reckon.
Okay,
Yeah.
ladies, enough of chit-chat, enough of small talk.
What do you mean it's over?
It's time for the main course. Let's get to the main course and debunk some of those sex myths in order to make our sex lives and sex lives of others better.
I have a good sex myth.
Yeah?
Oh yeah.
Which one?
I read it the other day. I'm very intellectual, like you, Olivia. Have you ladies ever heard of that Kellogg's, the cornflakes?
I used
Yeah.
to eat them.
Yeah, I used to eat them. So did I.
I still eat them.
I
mix them up.
Do they make you horny or what? What's
You
the
mix
deal?
them with
Oh,
what?
well, actually, Lina, they do the opposite.
Strike my pussy.
Well, just let me keep going with my fun fact. John Harvey Kellogg, he was a anti-masturbation crusader. Basically, he invented Kellogg's and didn't want to add any sugar in it because he thought that this would help curb sexual impulses. And if you added sugar, then it would make you more horny. So now it makes sense why I was always eating cornflakes. I was repressed.
So diabetes to kill your sex drive. Was that his purpose? Is that what you mean?
Okay, I didn't really read that much into it. I didn't do my homework.
I think he just thought, I've actually read about as an intellectual. I read about this and I think his theory was if I make something that's so bland tasting, if you start your day off in the most bland possible way, then it will curb your sexual impulses. Because he believed that if illicit commerce of the sexes is a heinous sin, self-pollution is a crime doubly abominable. So, yeah, you got that right. Yeah. If fucking's bad, masturbation is worse. So cue the terrible cardboard tasting cereals.
And there's also graham crackers involved. Do you remember digestives? Do you think digestives was involved?
You know, I think they curb your sex, not by being so bland, but by how much they could just get stuck in your mouth and they just like block you.
Sometimes I do like when things are stuck in my mouth and block me. But okay, that's something else. That's digestives.
You can keep that for the next chess boxing date.
Isn't that insane how much of Victorian medicine believed that, masturbation was bad for you? Like, they would think that a loss of semen was seriously injurious to health, and that a man must spill his essence sparingly by avoiding fornication, masturbation, and by limiting sex within marriage.
Boring.
Kellogg supposedly slept in a separate room from his wife. That's how much he was against sexual...
really?
Poor woman.
Yeah, sexual activity. Yeah, man, but they had 3 kids, so at least they fucked 3 times in their, many years of marriage.
Well, hopefully, if they slept in different rooms, the woman had a chance of, twinkling the little star, or maybe rubbing against the sheets or the
Maybe they're not
pillow.
even his kids.
What are some other more newer masturbation myths? I have to admit, ladies, I would have thought that singles masturbate more than people in a relationship, but that's just not true. It's just as likely that you masturbate as much as you masturbate, and regardless of if you're in a relationship or not. Do you know that?
I masturbate in front of people sometimes.
In front of people? What is
When
that?
I haven't eaten Kellogg's that morning, I'll masturbate in front of people. When you're sleeping with someone. Not like on the bus station,
Like carrying
banging
the
one
trench
out.
coat and then opening it okay,
We're
got
like,
it.
that is unconsensual.
Now we need to talk about your breakfast choices.
Yeah, I do a lot of mutual masturbation.
Yeah, mutual masturbation, no?
Yeah, next to your buddies or stuff, or
Or is
college type, everyone in circle, and is that the...
Oh, Lina, you always have to go.
Just to make it, she just pops it, doesn't she? She's like, oh yeah, me too, in a group of 10 in a circle.
Oh. Actually, have you ever heard of soggy biscuit? Well, this is a very dirty thing.
We're still at
What's
breakfast.
Are we
or-
still on the biscuit?
Soggy biscuit is a huge, this rumor that the all boys school, they would have a biscuit in the middle and 10 guys, and you have to jerk off and come on the biscuit, and it would be the last one to come would have to eat the biscuit.
Wait, that's a myth? I thought that was real. I
No,
fantasize about it.
This has nothing to do with the myth. I don't know if it's a myth. I haven't heard of it. I've heard of the game. Whether people play it is likely.
That's interesting. That I think that does say something about the myth, though, and us sort of having these ideas that masturbation is bad for you, or not talked about. That's quite an open discussion of masturbation, really. I don't know. I'm just
Unless you're the last
I'm
one to
just trying to
come.
make that relevant.
But that sounds pretty much like some sort of teenage challenge. So maybe that's also, I don't know, I'm imagining, these Catholic schools with all boys and stuff. And then you kind of all the closeted ones kind of get to bond with each other. But of course you cannot talk about it. But you have all these homoerotic games that you're supposed to feel disgusted about. But maybe, I don't know, in the end you enjoy it.
Ooh, I'm getting there. Tell me more. Tell me more.
We have a script here.
Kellogg should have invented the biscuit for that. Oh, God.
It's kind of everyone's just masturbating over cornflakes. Fuck you, Mr. Kellogg's. This is full of sugar.
Right
Yeah.
back at you.
So, we finally have a sponsor. And this is none other than Erstis. That's right, the Erstis podcast sponsored by Erstis. Who would have thought it? This means if you want to see what our day job looks like, then head to erstis-podcast.com/Erstis. That's ERSTIES. Check out the video and follow the link, and you'll receive 50% off your first month. Please note that the content is 18+. One last time, erstis-podcast.com/Erstis. Click the link, 50% off your first month. And you must be over 18. Now, back to the pot.
So, speaking of sex myths, actually, one of the current myths that irritates me, that really, really blows my mind, is the myth that of the existence of this thing called the G-spot orgasm. I don't know, for a while there's been a lot of buzz about the so-called G-spot that, to begin with, it's not a spot as if it was like some sort of mystical place
Right,
in
that's
vagina
a myth in
land.
itself, isn't it? 'Cause
Yes.
It's called a spot.
Because the G-spot is actually a proper prostate, like a prostate, very similar to the one the people with penises have. And it's also has been like recently scientifically named as female prostate. I think that female size still sounds funny to me, but at least it's been acknowledged that it's a fucking prostate.
This makes me feel so much better.
So, yeah, it's not a
feel so good
spot,
about myself.
it's not a funny body part, it's nonsense. And I think that to begin with, we could do ourselves a very big favor if we start calling things for what they are and forget about like vague terms that create plenty of confusion. So, having said that, lately, many irresponsible people have spread the belief that there's like this kind of orgasm that occurs when the G-spot is stimulated through vaginal penetration. And they talk about like this sort of like G-spot orgasms as some sort of orgasms of epic proportions. Like, for example, there's this website of this person who says, these are orgasms that changed your life. Or like, these deeper vaginal orgasms are like the Loch Ness monsters of sexuality. What the fuck is that? Loch Ness monster.
That's quite following on Freudian discourse about, right, clitoral orgasms being like the childish state, right? And then like getting into vaginal orgasms being like the woman, isn't it?
I always felt like there was something wrong with me. Like I really, like when I couldn't come from penetration, I was like, I feel like I'm missing out on something, you know? And that this just makes me feel so much better. Like,
and it's also the way in which like these sort of like orgasms are framed, because of course like if like the stimulation of your prostate requires like some requires vaginal penetration in many cases. So of course, what do you penetrate a vagina with? The fingers, God forbid. A dildo, oh my God, no, forget about it. You need like a penis of a cis man. So also like this sort of like orgasm, G-spots, bullshit whatsoever, they're framed within like very heteronormative relationships. And they're like, okay, this is how you get your man to give you this G-spot orgasms. And it's about like even like making feel men better about themselves and about making women come or about making women squirt when they haven't even asked them to, oh, how do you feel about stimulating you? So also the way in which is pretty much framed is like about, it's not about even like self-knowledge so that people with vaginas can get to know where the prostate is. It's about how can we make men feel even like more I don't know, better about themselves and their manhood and like some sort of like one more achievement in the conquest of feminine bodies.
Less disposable.
Yeah.
so many myths got just cracked just then.
Yeah.
I think like sex tips are quite bad in general for stuff like that though, aren't they? Because it can turn sex into sort of an ego thing for all parties where you're just trying to get that G-spot and not really paying attention to what's happening just because you want to be, you know, obviously you want to please your partner, etc., but
Sorry to interrupt. Have you met those lovers who are just like, I made her come 4 times? I'm like,
Yeah.
Congratulations. Thank
Well
you for letting me
done.
know that. I'm also going to move over to this side of the bar because you're creeping me out. Like,
Sorry, mate, it wasn't you, it was the
it-
clitoris.
Yeah, did
So,
you make her feel good or did it just make you feel good because you made her
Actually,
come
you did
4
nothing. I just tilted my pelvis in the right way to make it work for me because I know what I'm doing. But also going back to isn't it like, it does change things though, like putting the fingers in there and stimulating the G-spot. It does, it sort of alters the orgasm. But what you're saying is that it's not coming from the G-spot, that orgasms can only come from the clitoris?
yeah, from the clitoris, and of course it's also like related to the whole to the myth that there is like a vaginal orgasm and a clitoral orgasm, which is also part of the same nonsense. Like all orgasms come from the proper stimulation of the clitoris, and of course if we pay attention to the anatomy of the clitoris, we can find out that only around like 5% of the clitoris is external, and then like the all the rest of it, like it's inside our bodies. So of course, when you get like vaginal penetration, anal penetration, when you get your prostate stimulated, it can also, according to your personal anatomy, it can also stimulate the internal part of your clitoris. So of course, like many people, I mean, you can like masturbate and come, but maybe if you masturbate and get penetrated, then you might experience like some even more pleasure, but because like the stimulation of your clitoris is more like I don't know, just like get to bigger parts of your clitoris. So of course, like it's like it depends on every individual what kind of stuff like stimulates them the most. And so, but as such, like, but vaginal orgasms, G-spot orgasms, and the way in which they're framed, it's full of nonsense.
So does that dissolve another popular sex myth of the whole, I don't really want to get into this one today, but let's quickly go there, does size matter thing? Because then it's sort of, redirects, basically, it's, you know, something sort of like going against you, it's contacting the clitoris, which is this, you know, all around inside thing that we don't often talk about in that way, but it takes away from this idea that sort of deep penetration with a massive penis is what's needed for...
Well, it depends on
or whatever.
It depends on your vagina, because I mean, if you're talking about penetration, the vagina is a muscle. So of course, in some like cases, it's more for some people it's more contracted. For some people, it's more like ample and such. And also depending again on like the anatomy of the person, like how they're built, how their bodies are built. You enjoy like certain levels of penetration, and so.
So it's not one size fits all, is it?
The baby can get out of there and a small dick can get in there. It's nothing.
No.
I have one more thing, but what about that other bit? Right, you know, like where it feels like you're getting fucked and it's like right, like at the back. It's right at the end. It's the end of the line.
When is the point of no?
Oh, do you mean the pounding?
It doesn't have to be the pounding, but just it feels like it's the deepest point.
With your eyes popping
and
out.
it's hitting against something.
Right, but that is the cervix.
But the cervix is coming down, so it's like past that. So if you go past the cervix, you keep going straight on.
Take a left, go up the elevators, you'll be in ladies' lingerie. Where
And
are we
you'll
going?
come out of your mouth.
Where are we going with this?
Eyes popping out.
What do you mean there's more than the cervix?
No, because I feel like, I mean, if something's hitting against my cervix, I don't enjoy it. It feels like a bit sensitive and whatnot. But behind that bit, what is that?
Well, the thing is, there's different nerve pathways that carry sensory signals from like the vagina, the cervix, the clitoris, and the uterus, and they all can contribute to orgasms.
Ah, isn't it interesting? I've never thought before about like where orgasms come from physiologically. Like,
Thing is that it's all connected.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is like all these nerves finally end up in your brain, you know? And like the interesting part is some of these nerves, like the vagus nerve, they don't go through the spinal cord, meaning a person with a spinal cord injury could still be feeling orgasms.
Really?
Through another stimuli. Yeah. Also, it is proven, like scientifically proven already, that there are non-genital stimuli that can also produce orgasms. And these stimuli can be, exactly, the boobs.
I just touched my nipples.
Or even just visual stimuli.
That's what I was about to say. I was like, if it's connected to the brain, can the brain just send?
Yes, it's all teamwork.
Yes.
Actually, I was watching a video about this. Like, I think it was like a documentary, possibly on Vice, and I was watching like how someone was interviewing this thing. I wish I did more research on this, as usual. Shit, guys. There are people who are getting paid to like stimulate people who have spinal injuries, and I was watching them. They turn them over. They were like playing with the insides of their wrists or like blowing feathers onto their nipples and stuff, and they were able to achieve orgasm. That's really cool.
You know who's done a lot of research on this topic? I think it's time to call our bull of today, our expert, Dr. Zhana. Dr. Zhana Vrangalova. She's a New York City-based sex researcher, writer, and educator. She has a PhD in developmental psychology from Cornell University, and she describes her work as debunking sex myths that ruin lives. To be honest, I'm a huge fan of Dr. Zhana.
We know.
Heart beats faster.
She's in love.
I've learned so much by listening to her podcast, The Science of Sex, and I feel it is so important to have a voice that is coming from academia, but is making all the research that is actually going on sex, sexual studies accessible to everyone, but from a scientific point of view, and like backing up everything that she's saying with real data. Lina and me went and had a very long interview with her, which was fascinating, and we want to share it with you, ladies.
Oh, I'm so excited.
Oh, yay.
We started by asking Dr. Zhana what she, as a sex educator, thought were the most believed and most harmful sex myths.
It's really hard to pick a few, but I'm going to try. How many do I have? Do I get 3?
Yeah, we'll give you 3.
Okay, you give me 3. I think probably the most harmful one when it comes to mutual kind of pleasure between men and women that affects women negatively is that penetration is the way that women come, or that's enough for women, for most women, to have a pleasurable sexual experience. And I see that just over and over and over again in coming up in people's lives. Another one that I think is really big and problematic is this understanding, and this goes beyond just sex and into long-term relationships, that when you find the one person that you are that you're in love with, that's the one, or whatever you want to call them, that you are going to be desiring passionately in love and in lust with that person for the rest of your life. And that if that passion and lust wanes at some point, or even gets to the point of almost non-existence, that means that's not the one, that something is wrong, that you don't love them anymore, that they don't love you, that there's a problem in the relationship and it has to end, kind of thing. And I think that's a myth that we have about how love and sex are connected, that are really harmful to people's lives in terms of how they go about their relationships. And then
You have one more.
one more. Okay, I have one more. I want to say something about something that combines, porn and sex work in general, and this has been on my mind a lot lately since those really harmful laws got passed in the U.S., the FOSTA laws regarding sex work. And so even though this affects a smaller percentage of the population, I think it's so deeply entrenched and kind of has to do with, and it does harm the quite a bit the people who are engaged in that world, and that basically all sex work is, and I define sex work very broadly, and maybe porn can kind of fit under that to some extent, that basically all sex work, porn included, engaging in that is in some way coerced and non-consensual, and in some way kind of trafficking or in some other ways very harmful to the people who engage in it, that no healthy, sane person would be doing it just because that's something that they love. And I think that's just wrong. There's plenty of evidence to suggest that that's just wrong.
Thank you. I think if we follow with these myths regarding sex work and porn, one thing that we're very often confronted, I would say every journalist that ever has interviewed me has brought out the topic of porn addiction. We want to ask you, what would you say, is porn addiction real?
That is such a big debate right now in the academic community, in the academic literature. There are people on both sides of that debate, and both kind of camps are producing research to support their side of the story, right? And so it's hard for me to give definitive answers on that. There's some arguments pro and con, depending on how you define some of these things, how you define addiction and all that. It's very obvious that there are some people out there who use porn, who watch porn, and in ways that are not very productive and healthy, and that impact their lives in negative ways, and that obviously spend too many hours doing that, and neglect their other social and romantic and professional duties because of that, and experience some level of sexual difficulties because of that. So there are people who are using this for whom this seems to be an issue in their lives. Same with sex, same with anything, same with, I don't know, food and exercise and work. And there are people who are workaholics. There are people who are spending too much time exercising and neglecting everything else. So any behavior that is rewarding to some extent, and porn is certainly rewarding, and masturbation is certainly rewarding, it can get to the point of being done in an unhealthy way, or in a way that overtakes someone's life. But is it the porn that is really the issue here, or are we talking about some level of dissatisfaction in one's life, that this is just the avenue in which this is manifesting itself, this particular person? So it's hard for me to blame the porn on that. It's more about, well, what is going on in your life that you feel the need to spend 3-4 hours at a time doing this and neglect everything else? Like, what is going on? It's not the porn that's causing this. Watching porn for that much time seems to be a symptom of something else going on in your life. So that's kind of my take on things, because there are plenty of people, the vast majority of people who consume pornography consume it in ways that are responsible, just like the vast majority of people who exercise, to an extent that is responsible, or whatever you want to call it, and that doesn't affect their lives negatively.
Okay, I get that, but why use the word addiction if it's just similar to being a workaholic or something like that? You wouldn't use addiction in that context. Is this just like a media sensationalist move to be like, whoa, porn addiction?
I think it's much easier to sell headlines by saying porn addiction or sex addiction as opposed to compulsivity or impulsivity or something like that. So yeah, I think one aspect that we didn't talk about is very often, so we do have evidence that very often the people who think of themselves as porn addicts or sex addicts in general, they don't actually have higher rates of anything that you might think that they have higher rates of. So they don't have higher sex drive, for example. They don't have more sex with more people. Sometimes some of the sex so-called or self-labeled sex addicts don't even masturbate more necessarily than other people who also report high sex drive, but don't think of themselves as sex addicts or porn addicts. And the difference between the two groups very often has to do with how religious they are. So people who are more religious, or people who have more shame and guilt around sexuality, are much more likely to interpret their high levels of sexual interest and desire and maybe behavior as problematic, right? So that's a huge piece that plays into our understanding or our conversations around sex addiction and porn addiction, which is, okay, we have a range of people in terms of their sex drive, just basic sex drive, and then also the interest in kind of uncommitted, casual encounters and variety of sexual partners and sexual experiences. So you can think of those as these continuums from not at all interested in sex or in sexual novelty, like people who are asexual, or people who are very, very uninterested in having multiple partners and crazy sexual experiences and whatnot. They're perfectly happy with, say, one partner and not a lot of variety within that. And then all the way to the other end of the spectrum, where people want a lot of sex a lot of the time, and also potentially with a lot of different people. So I would think of these as two separate continua, just basic sex drive of how much sex you want, and then the kind of interest in sexual novelty as another continuum. So why people end up at different levels of different points of this continuum is determined by biology, by basic biology, as well as some social reasons growing up. But there's nothing pathological about being, just like there's nothing pathological about being on the low end of that spectrum. There's nothing inherently pathological about being at the high level of that, on the high end of that spectrum. But very often, because we as society have decided that high end of the spectrum is problematic and we don't want that and that's wrong, the people who end up there very often internalize these messages of shame and guilt of you shouldn't be this way. And so if you have two people who are just as high on, and very high, let's say, on both sex drive and sexual novelty, but one of them has found, let's say, herself in an environment where she's being told that that's wrong because maybe of religious reasons or some other reasons. She's married monogamously to a person who thinks that, watching porn and having sex with other people or wanting other people is wrong. And she has a job where if they know that she's had sex with somebody else, for example, she's going to get fired. And that other person with the exact same level of sex drive and interest in sexual novelty and all that could be living in a sex positive community with people who are perfectly open and accepting of being poly and being sexual and all that. That person is not going to experience any amount of issues around her sexuality compared to the first person who might be experiencing a lot and may be thinking of herself as a sex addict and a porn addict and whatnot. So, sorry, that was a very long-winded answer, but I think that is one aspect of the conversation is how much shame and guilt we imbue. And I think a lot of the people who feel like they are sex addicts or porn addicts have that feeling because of this societal stigma associated with it. But I also don't think that in all cases. I still think that there are some people who, even if they don't feel shame and guilt, might end up using porn or using other forms of sexual release in ways that are kind of, as you were saying, compulsive and unhealthy and not necessarily very intentional, and maybe putting themselves at higher risks than they should be. And I think in those cases, we're talking more about other issues like, maybe depression or anxiety or self-esteem or some other form of dissatisfaction in their personal or professional lives that this is basically their coping mechanism. And I would keep those two groups separate. And I think both of those can be fed into this porn sex addiction narrative, even though in both cases there are different underlying issues that really should be the ones being addressed rather than this porn sex addiction monster that is kind of like a boogeyman.
I think another of the myths regarding porn or porn consumption is that when you start watching porn, like the more porn you watch, the more hardcore porn you want to watch. So say you start watching some vanilla and then you want to see anal, and then you want to see DP, and then you want to see fisting, and then and then you get like desensitized to sexual practices. Is there any research that backs that up, or?
There's some research looking into that, and it seems like that is not the case for the vast majority of people. That most people have certain preferences, wherever those preferences may be, and they are not going to deviate that much. They're not, the whole, the gateway drug with weed, and then once you start smoking weed, then everybody's going to end up on heroin or crack, right? And it's kind of the same way of thinking about porn. Once you see a woman masturbating, then eventually you're going to end up with heavy BDSM and whatnot. And it is true for some people. That does happen for some people. This, the first step into it might be the gateway drug. But that seems to be a relatively small minority of people who are predisposed to be these very high novelty seeker and who have high levels of boredom susceptibility. And for them, that might be true. Yes, absolutely. But it seems like for the majority of people, that is not the case. You might have a preference for vanilla kind of one-on-one girl-boy sex, and chances are if that's going to remain your preference for the rest of your life. Or you might be someone who's really into anal, and if you're really into anal, then you're going to be watching anal scenes, for decades. And that's not going to change. That's not to say you might sometimes explore a little bit, like, oh, okay, well, what other versions of anal can I see? Oh, there's VP, or there's double anal, or whatever. But then for many people who are just interested in plain old anal, they're going to go back to plain old anal scenes for the most part in terms of their porn watching habits. So, and all of the research is showing that the vast majority of porn being watched on the internet is pretty vanilla, straight up heterosexual kind of one-on-one kind of porn.
What about this common belief that men are more visual than women when it comes to watching porn? Is there like evidence that this is true, or how, or what are like the different like contrasts between this?
Yeah, there is. I mean, there's certainly plenty of evidence to suggest that there are some gender differences in many areas of sexuality, and that does seem to be the one, or seems to be one of them, that men will focus more on visual information and will spend more time on that. Now,
that's not the answer that we were searching, Dr. Zhana.
I know, sorry.
You're disappointing us. Science is disappointing us.
As I said, sometimes it finds things you want to find, and sometimes it doesn't. But I want to qualify that. You can ask, well, how big is that gender difference? Very often, when science finds gender differences, that gets interpreted by the non-scientists as, well, all women are completely non-visual and all men are completely visual, right? That gender difference gets interpreted in that very black or white, all or nothing kind of way. And that's really not the case. It's all a bell curve. It's all a normal distribution to some extent, with plenty of women being much more visual than many men, and many men being a lot less visual than many women, and so on. It's just the average of those distributions is somewhat increased among men than among women, right? So that gender difference is not that massive. It's statistically significant in the vast majority of studies that we've had, but it's not like all men are on Mars and all men are from Venus kind of thing, right? It's much more, it's much smaller, and those distributions, those bell curves, are largely overlapping in terms of that. So there are plenty of women out there who are quite visual, and plenty of men out there who are not so visual. Now, that being said, there's also the other question of, well, why is this happening? And what is driving that gender difference? And I am very convinced, based on all the evidence that we have, that evolution does play some role in that, in how we've evolved as a species over time, and that some of those visual cues were more relevant to the reproductive success of men to some extent, and somewhat less. There are other cues that are somewhat more relevant to women's reproductive success, so that there is some evolutionary reason for that. But there are also plenty of social reasons that play into that, in how we socialize men and women, and how we create different barriers to reproductive success for men and women in our societies that create that distinction to some extent. And we certainly teach women that watching porn is not okay for them, or should not be okay for them, a lot more than we teach boys. For boys, we're like, well, the boys are boys; they're gonna watch porn anyway, So yeah, I think it's a mix of reasons, and just because there might be some difference in this regard doesn't mean that women don't like visual information. And in fact, the more we encourage women to focus on some visual cues, or allow them to enjoy visual cues, the more they can enjoy that. So, but there are some differences. We can't negate them. Men and women do, as of now, show plenty of average differences in several areas of their sexual psychology.
Amazing. Because over here, we completely believe that this visual gap can be fixed if we introduce more diversity in the porn that's available in the internet. We're totally kind of like fighting for that over here.
Well, and I agree. You can narrow that gap quite a bit, because by introducing some types of visual stimuli that apply to women. Now, of course, women like visual stimuli. They watch TV, regular TV, just as much as men do, right? It's not like they don't like to watch stuff. But it's also about how you approach this. And one kind of typical thing that people have been discussing when it comes to porn is, well, is there a plot line? Is there a storyline? Is there some kind of interaction between the characters that goes beyond penis and vagina, 100 BPM or whatever, like jackrabbit fucking that goes on. And if you just focus on, a 20-second foreplay that immediately goes to that up close and personal genitals going in and out of one another, that is intrinsically going to be less interesting to women, because women do seem to care more about the context of the situation that leads to the genitals doing what they're going to do with one another. So I think if you bring more of that in, that's one way of bridging that gap. Does that ring true in terms of what you're trying to do? And
Yeah, absolutely. Now we're happy with your answer. now that we brought it to our arena.
What are some other things that you think? What other kinds of things do you think would appeal more to women, or would bring more women into watching porn?
Well, I think I would go back to what you said about how women are socialized. And I believe that if we would encourage more women to have more sexual agency, to explore more without shame their sexuality, I think that would already make a difference in the way that women, because I think, as you were saying, like boys are encouraged to, like, boys will be boys, they will look at porn. If women would have that space also to explore, then they would be watching more from an earlier age. And then maybe they would be discovering sooner what they like, and then consuming it more, and I think I can talk for myself. Maybe I think it took me, I was always a very sexual curious person, and still it took me so long, I feel, to finally find the kind of porn that I like to watch. And I grew up in a quite, very open household, very progressive. I had a lot of liberties and other people did not have. I'm very privileged in that sense, and still it took me so long. And I see, partners, colleagues, whatever, other people, male, they have been, socialized as men, and they just, it was very, they didn't give it too much thought. They just looked for porn and masturbated to porn. Whereas I thought about it and talked about it and read about it, before I finally did it. So
in many ways, it's a fight that you have to fight for yourself. Like even having the access of the attitude to discover your own sexuality by your own means, it's something that you really have to fight for. It's not given to you. It's something you are ashamed for doing it if you are a little bit open about it. And of course, if it's something that's very personal that no one talks about it, or someone talks about it with shame, even within putting into the porn arena into more broader pornographic genres. And so I think that in many ways the porn that is labeled as porn for women, it has somehow this kind of patronizing tone. It's the light porn, and also it's full of all these cliches that all women fantasize about, having missionary sex with their Prince Charming in a bed of roses. So it's
obviously not true.
No.
But one of the big issues with, I think, porn and women is that a lot of the stuff that looks good on camera does not necessarily feel good in real life, right? If you want to show exactly what, say, cunnilingus looks like going down on a woman, or many of the positions, penetrative positions that feel great when you're having sex in real life, they don't necessarily look like you can't really get in there and show the genitals and what exactly is happening. So I think that's this one barrier for bringing people into it. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think that is a very good point. Then again, I think there is ways like porn is cinema, and the magic of cinema, allows you to escape those barriers. And I think there is ways, and there's proposals of showing that kind of sex that is maybe not as easy to portray, but there's so many things you can do with a camera, and you can cut and edit out, and or just even if you're not showing the exact genital interaction going on, if you have a camera that is very close to
to the people, to the performers, and you're just floating around, and you know you don't need to see exactly what's happening in order to know what's happening, right? So as long as you're able to portray or like to
and you can even be like you have like the power, or you're in a position where you can actually propose new things. If it's like all the women who have like are so used to penis in vagina sex, maybe like show some kind of like a scene in which you can see a little bit more of clit rubbing, for example, or like external stimulation or fingers and so. And even if you're going a little bit more like a little bit further, I mean, I would love to see more fisting, for example, in pornography, and that's something that that it's not like exclusive of lesbian sex. What if the heterosexual couples visit each other, even each other more often, you know?
And I think that's exactly something that you would not see in like porn for women labeled porn, because it's associated with something too brutal. I think a lot of the people, creating like porn for women, they want to go away from like brutality or more like kinky, even if it's consensual, but violence. And then they're doing, by trying to be better for women, they're actually like taking away like practices that would be completely like satisfactory and great.
Right. Yeah. That's it.
Wait a minute. Let's talk, Lina. What is this about the fisting? Go on. Tell me more.
Lina just wanted to say fisting to Dr. Zhana. She was just
and see her reaction. How do you feel? Fisting. How do you like it? Fisting. Would you like a glass of Coke? Fisting.
It's good for your health.
And I love that Dr. Zhana was just like, okay, yeah.
Fisting. There's a lot of picturing of it.
You're like subliminally like sending her a message, Fisting.
Fisting, yeah, totally. Why not? I mean...
So that myth is true.
Yes. Speaking of, all the clitoral stimulation, and then you get your clit to the max compression,
It's true.
Yeah.
I'm just going to repeat that all the time.
Should we go back to the interview now?
Yes.
So there's a lot of talk about porn, but what about my masturbation questions with the Kellogg's? I want to know. I'm repressed about my masturbating.
We got you covered on this.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
We asked Dr. Zhana if there's any scientific data that proves that masturbation could be bad for you.
I mean, you can do anything too much. It's like sure, yeah. If you're sitting at home day after day masturbating for 7-8 hours, and you're not getting paid to do that, then and you're not doing anything else, sure. But if you're watching TV 8 hours a day and not doing anything else, like that's terrible for you. Anything, any human behavior that's out there that can be usually good or can have an important positive role in your life, you can overdo it. I can't think of a single thing that this would not apply to. So I don't think masturbation is any different from that. In terms of thinking about having a well-rounded life that includes other things, includes work and friends and hobbies and all that. That said, what's too much will differ for different people, and also depending on what your life is like and what your other things that you're doing in life are, and how much time you have to do this without that affecting your life negatively. So yeah, I think everybody has to decide what is too much for them and what is a healthy amount of that. And I have no problem with people saying, look, masturbation is just not, it takes over my life. I can't seem to do it in a way that is healthy and whatever. And so I'm going to stop masturbating altogether. Like if that's what works for you, sure, great. I have no issue with that. And I also have no issue with people being, no, I love masturbating and I do it, every day and sometimes multiple times a day, as long as, again, they feel good about that level of masturbation and they feel they're getting, something valuable out of that without that impacting their lives in negative ways. Physically speaking, physiologically speaking, I already talked about that a little earlier. There can be some drawbacks to masturbating a lot and masturbating in particular ways. If you're, especially with edging, and men, because of their refractory period, because there is a physiological point of exhaustion of of the system, if you are spending a lot of hours a day, kind of bringing yourself to the edge or masturbating to orgasm several times a day, then chances of you having sexual arousal and energy and kind of engagement, both psychological excitement and physiological arousal and erection, is going to be more difficult with a partner that same day, right? Because you've already exhausted that system for the day, and you need some time, you need that refractory period to occur, to take place before you can kind of get it up again psychologically and physiologically speaking. And then, so that's just something to keep in mind. If you know you're going to be getting laid later today, well, maybe you don't want to edge for 3 hours, or you don't want to come twice that morning and afternoon before you go out. It's just something to kind of keep in mind. If you know that you're not getting laid that day and you have the time to do it, then by all means, spend as much time as you want edging and watching porn that you think is good for you that day. And then the other issue that we've been seeing with masturbation is the way people masturbate. Sometimes with men, sometimes they grip really hard and they jerk off very fast, and then they complain that they can't come with penetrative sex with a partner. And it kind of makes sense that they've trained basically their penises to come only after that particular type of stimulation, which cannot be reproduced with a vagina. You just cannot possibly get it to grip so hard and move it so fast.
Sorry, is that what they call the death grip? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I'm talking about the death grip. Yeah, exactly. So it's both the how hard you grip, and then also how fast, right, you do the jerking motion. And you just can't go that fast with a human being, especially not for prolonged periods of time. Maybe you can go really fast for a couple of minutes, but then you get exhausted, and it's also hard to get the bodies to move in that rhythm for an extended period of time at that speed. And so it's just very hard to reproduce that type of stimulation with a live human. And so there can be some issues with that. And kind of the equivalent for women, the most common experience of that kind with women is when they get used to masturbating and orgasming with vibrators, especially that very, very high intensity vibrators like the Hitachi. And so again, they train their clitoris and their vulvas and the nerve endings in that area. They train them to orgasm only after that very, very intense and fast vibration that again cannot really be reproduced by a penis, a tongue, a finger, a hand. And so they have a hard time having an orgasm in these other contexts. But all of these things, they're not, so people very often fear that if you've done this to yourself, a kind of thing, after a prolonged period of time of masturbating with the Hitachi or with the death grip, that you've somehow now fucked yourself over for the rest of your life, that somehow you killed some nerve endings and this is it. Now you're doomed to forever and ever.
Is that the case? No.
It's not. No, it's not. You can retrain yourself, but so you would have to kind of spend some time masturbating in a different way, not using that very high levels of speed and intensity and all that. And so you can kind of retrain your genitals to respond to different levels of stimulation. You kind of have to vary the ways that you masturbate, and you have to maybe even go cold turkey on that particular method of masturbation that is particularly difficult to replicate with human beings. And then you can bring it back in to some extent if you kind of keep it varied. I think this often happens to people when they don't have a partner for long periods of time, and all they do, the only kinds of orgasms that they're having is in this very specific way that then cannot be reproduced with partners. And so then if they have like a sporadic partner, they hook up once in 6 months or whatever, and they're like, okay, this is not working because, but it can certainly be changed. It can certainly be retrained back.
As we were coming to the end, we wondered, we all have fought with sex myths and had to overcome them. Had Dr. Zhana had to overcome some prejudices herself throughout her time as a sex researcher?
Well, I think think the greatest barrier for me in terms of overcoming prejudices has not been in my sex research career or the professional aspect. It was in my personal life as someone who was highly sexual and not really conforming to the very narrow box that our society, my society, where I grew up in Macedonia, and then the U.S. society as well, that narrow box that is deemed acceptable. And in many ways, as a woman who wasn't heterosexual, as a woman who was highly sexual, as a woman who liked casual sex and multiple partners, as a woman who was non-monogamous in her relationships and all of that, like I had a lot more of these personal prejudices that I had to deal with, and I had to deal with many of them before I even started my career as a sex researcher. So by then, having overcome those, nothing else really compared. Every other kind of barriers were minor and didn't feel like big obstacles that I needed to get over. But it was, and as I said, I have a really thick skin, and I had developed that thick skin over my personal life growing up as this kind of non-traditional sexual human being. So by the time I got to academia, it wasn't that big of a deal.
I think we can totally relate to that, right, Lina? And so thank you so much for your insights. It's super inspiring and really such an honor to be talking to you. I think we would love to hear to tell our listeners, where can people find your work and support you and your work?
This is super fun. If people want to know more about me and my work, I can be found at my website, Dr. Zhana, DRZHANA.com. I'm on all social media as Dr. Zhana, same thing, DRZHANA. My podcast is the Science of Sex podcast, and you can find it on wherever you find your podcast, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and so on. I also, what else? And if people like what I do and want to support some of our work, the podcast, and all of the other things that we do, I have a Patreon account, patreon.com/Dr. Zhana, where people can become monthly subscribers for as little as $1 and support our work that way. So lots of different ways to get in touch. I also do personalized kind of sex education sessions with people who want to learn more about themselves or whatever fascinates them about sexuality. So you can book me for that as well through my website.
Fantastic. And we encourage all of our listeners to support your work because we're definitely huge fans. Thank you, Dr. Zhana, so much for being with us today.
So edging is okay.
I was like sitting on the edge of my seat the whole time.
Am I normal? Is this okay?
She kept being like, the thing is, if it's going to take you 3 hours, if you're going to use that long, and I'm like, but is it fine though?
Edging is okay for 3 hours as long as you don't have any work to do. Don't procrastinate.
Shit. I found it really, really reassuring what she said about being able to retrain your vagine, your clit, your whatever you've
So if you've gone down the dark hole, you can come back.
Too much time with the Hitachi on. Yeah, that you can change that.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's all muscles, right? And you can just train them in different directions. It's
yeah,
exciting.
You're not ruined forever.
What I found really interesting is the fact that porn addiction has way more to do with the way you think about yourself and about your porn consumption than actually the amount of porn that you're watching.
I know, that was amazing. That it was just like they're watching exactly the same amounts generally, or like that people with porn addiction aren't watching anymore.
But what's causing them trouble
My
is...
favorite part exactly was that, like the part of like the moralistic. So it's more like, okay, forget the pseudoscientific bullshit, forget about the pathological bullshit. It's your religion, it's your like fucked up morals who are in trouble.
Who are fucking with your head.
Yes.
And actually that's going to cause you way more suffering in the end. It's not even the watching too much porn or anything that's going to damage you, but it's the feelings of shame about watching the porn and about your supposed addiction that's going to, give you a heart attack. No, that's not scientifically proven.
Yeah.
I'm not a
Cure
doctor.
your soul. Stop blaming it on porn, basically.
Exactly.
Today we have some aftercare to do. We had some response from our listeners to our last episode on consent, and we would love to address it.
So, a female identified listener sent us this very thoughtful message. It says, first, thank you. All of your thoughts and opinions and experiences that you shared around consent were very relatable and relevant. Yay! Second, in the last 10 minutes, someone said that we as women are taught how to say yes, but not how to say no. I agree to the extent that I see that paradigm playing out on the global stage, but I also disagree. As young girls, at least in America, we are taught to say no before we are ever, if ever, taught to say yes. When our bodies have physical release, oftentimes we find ourselves in situations that are disempowering and degrading because we aren't encouraged to explore our sexuality in a healthy way. All of the language and conversation around young women becoming sexually active centers on, basically, a policy of just say no. How would you address consent in that light? From the perspective of a young woman who was very sexual as a young teen and shamed as a result. Thank you again for your female progress. So,
That's a total valid point, and I actually agree absolutely with her, and I share her experience. I think it is true that in most societies it is put upon the woman the task to be the one saying no and resisting, I'm doing here the finger thing, the men's advances, and then like logically consequently then being shamed if they are the ones that are being sexually active and seeking a sexual encounter.
So yeah, it's pretty much like this thought that, it's very sexist in many ways because it's like this very thought, like, men are predators and you are the prey all the time. So you have you are not really given the resources for being able to decide for yourself what's the deal or to be able to negotiate situations that you might feel tempted into jumping in a way that's responsible.
We are also very privileged as women. We are based in Berlin.
Yeah.
This is and she just mentioned here she is based in America, and obviously I don't want to stereotype or judge it, but I know that America has a very interesting concept of sexual health and everything regarded in sexual related topics.
Right, it's got an absence only sex education.
Donald Trump, sorry.
No, but in many ways I kind of feel identified with her because, not at this point, but I think during my early years and even early adolescence, I was raised in this way, pretty much you have to say no because the moment you say yes, you might become a prey or you might end up with the wrong kind of guy. So my mechanism from protecting myself from all this bullshit was just saying no, but not being able to stand for myself or to get the things that I wanted. For me, it's something that came, I think, later on, in my late adolescence, early adulthood, and there was a situation in which I had to learn for myself. But I can very much relate to her in the way that, don't have boyfriends or be careful because there's abusive people or you could get pregnant, whatever.
Exactly. Also, it links to this whole idea of women being the guardians of something that is precious and has to be that is something that can be taken off of you. Right? So you have to say no in order to preserve that virginity or that sacred whatever bullshit that it is that women have regarding their sexuality. So yeah, very much aligns with rape culture, I'd say.
Or that there's nothing you could possibly do to prevent any sort of abuse. No matter what you try to do, you will always be a victim. You will always be powerless.
Yeah, it's annoying that that's always put on the women, those conversations. It's when a dad says to his daughter, I'm not worried about you, I just don't trust the guys out there. The guys can just go around behaving whatever way, but it's the women, like you were saying.
Yeah, exactly, and you have to stay home because it's dangerous for you to go out.
They're out of control, they're just boys, that's what they're like.
Boys will
you
be
need
boys.
to remember to say no. Yeah.
Men need to change their attitude because I feel like we are women now, we are changing our attitude towards being sexual beings, and now it's the men's turn to do their job. It's half the people, come on,
Like, there's one way to prevent rape. Stop raping.
Stop penetrating when I say no.
It's interesting, isn't it, that it's so like yes is really important and no is really important.
Yeah, both. And I think the shift towards this, like, in the 70s, 80s, we had no means no, which was such an important, I think discourse. And now we're shifting to the yes means yes. So enthusiastic consent. And I think that is mostly what we were trying to bring to our listeners, and maybe that's why we shifted the conversation towards this enthusiastic yes, but we need to be reminded of the full scope of these like sexist structures that play a role in women just not having the sexual agency to give consent.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the feedback. And if any other listeners would like to give us feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can write to us on our website. If you just go to the About page and scroll down, there's a little square box thingy that you can write your thoughts about how great we are.
How is my radio voice?
How is my radio voice today? Or you can also DM us on Twitter.
At Twitter, Erstis Podcast.
Our kink is good questions, by the way.
Yeah, we love
So
it.
send them our way. Looking forward to hearing you. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode on sex myths. We hope to change the world and your sex lives one episode at a time. Keep tuned for the next one because we went out and searched for more people like us. We talked to sex podcasters, including Asa Akira from the Pornhub podcast and Conor Habib from the Everyone Against Conor Habib podcast. Remember, if you're missing us badly, our meets episodes come out in between our main episodes just to keep you going. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, or wherever you listen to your podcast, and you can follow us on Twitter at Erstis Podcast and visit our website erstis-podcast.com. Thank you. The Erstis